Another week and another milling machine tool that is filthy, that is in need of some refurbishment. I have this 8-inch rotary table from John B. Stevens. Everything seems to function correctly on it. I'm just sure that there's some gummed up bits here and there that I want to go ahead and take care of. I'm not doing this in any particular order. I'm just kind of going with the flow. Remove the table locks and the indicator. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over and remove this bottom plate that holds the whole table down to keep it from lifting. The crank handle is on an eccentric that when you rotate it, it clears the worm from the table, allowing the table to rotate freely. And here I am removing the clamp that locks that into place. And then there's also this backlash adjustment pin that keeps it from rotating too far. There's this second set screw and nut that, quite frankly, I still haven't figured out what its purpose is. With those two things out, now I can pull the entire worm shaft and eccentric out from the main body of the table. Overall, it looks really good. There's not any wear in the worm. It's covered in rust and grease, but doesn't look too bad. This is the remnants of a Gitz oiler. I'll be replacing that. And then here is the fill plug for the oil. The worm on this sits in an oil bath. And at this point, it's just a matter of lifting the table off of the main casting. I can get a look at this worm gear, and it looks fine. I don't really see anything on here except for I guess you'd call it oil scum or something on it. It just seems to be coating everything. A couple of these socket head cap screws needed some extra persuasion. I used a ratchet. I guess you would call this an interference fit, so it took a little prying with a brass punch to pop that off. There's a grub screw where there should be a knurled thumb screw on the dial, which would allow you to zero the dial, but it is rusted onto the crank, so I'm going to have to address that later. I'll go ahead and remove the handle from the shaft here. This thing has these split nuts on it, which I guess is somewhat like a lock nut. And like everything else so far, this handle is stuck on the shaft, so it needed to be persuaded to come off. And make sure I don't lose this key. Like I mentioned before, this dial should spin freely on here, and it doesn't, so I'll have to get some rust remover. And now I can remove the nut off of the end of the shaft that holds the worm on. Again, it's one of those split nuts that locks it in place. This worm is on the shaft fairly tightly, so I'm going to use this small gear puller to pull it off. One of these days I do need to make a center saver so I don't gall the center on shafts like this in case I would ever need to put it back in the lathe for any reason. That worm is keyed to the shaft with this woodruff key, and if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I have some fun, well, not really fun, with woodruff keys. This one was easier than some that I've had to deal with, but I think I've fine-tuned my techniques on how to get these out safely. And that's the last bit that needs to come apart. So now all of this will go into a degreasing bath. I'll clean all the grease off of it best I can, and then they'll go into a bucket of evapor rust to try to eliminate any remaining rust. Well, with everything grease and rust free, I can now start the reassembly process. I'll start by inserting the shaft into the eccentric, and I'll set the woodruff key and then install the worm onto the end of the shaft. Likely caused by some of my disassembly techniques, but the woodruff key has some burrs on it, so I'll just use this small file to take those down so that worm can fit on there easier. It's still a pretty tight fit for that worm on the shaft, and I didn't have a piece of pipe that would have made a better tool here, so I'm just using a brass hammer carefully to put that worm on, and now I can reapply that split lock nut. I use an impact driver and a socket to get the nut on close. I know I'm going to have to readjust this thing to make sure I get as much of the play out of it as I can. Using a little bit of oil on the eccentric before I insert it into the table casting. This is the top half of that eccentric clamp. I had already inserted the bottom half before I had inserted the eccentric, and it just locks in place with this socket head cap screw. This pin hits a stop on the eccentric and is meant to keep the eccentric from traveling too far left counterclockwise, and set it so you get the right amount of backlash, which should be almost none when using the crank. If you have it too far clockwise, you'll have a lot of play in the handle. Again, that mystery set screw, which I still have no idea what it's for, and then finally a replacement Gitz oiler that I bought off of eBay. After putting some oil on the handle, I can put the dial on and the new knurled thumb screw. That dial did come off after soaking it in evapor rust for a day or so. Now with those two together, put the key back on the shaft, and I can put the handle back on. Easy, right? So I realize it's going to be easier to put the handle back on before I put the eccentric into the body. So I took the eccentric out again. It won't be the last. And that made it a lot easier to line the keyholes together and then reinsert the key. And with the handle seated on, I reinstalled the spacer and the lock nut. Now with that all together, I can reinstall the eccentric into the rotary table for the last time, maybe. Now I'll reassemble the worm gear itself onto the rotary table. I always like to apply oil to any mating surfaces that are metal on metal. I think it makes it a little easier to go on. Plus, I look at it as a bit of a rust preventative. Applying liberally oil to the bearing surfaces that the table will sit on. And then rotate the eccentric all the way clockwise so that the worm doesn't interfere with the gear when I drop the table on. Rotating the eccentric back counterclockwise, the worm will engage with that gear. Putting these table clamps on now, so when I flip the table over, it'll be held into the body of the casting, so I can go ahead and put that retaining plate back on the bottom of the table. And this plate and thumb screw just allow you to zero in the table. There's a indicator line on that plate. Now I can turn the entire thing over and put this retaining plate back on. I'd like to take a quick second to thank all the subscribers to the channel. I enjoy making these videos, and I especially enjoy seeing that other people are watching them. So if you're not a subscriber, it would mean a lot to me if you'd go ahead and hit that subscribe button and maybe hit that bell icon too, so you'll get notified when I publish a new video. I'll remove that fill plug again and pump in a fair amount of lubricating oil. Everything's good and lubricated now. I'm zeroing everything out right now. I want to check, total operation and check how much backlash is in the dial and see what I can do to adjust that. I'm just checking right now for any kind of backlash and if there's any accuracy in the dial. I think I'm feeling something that's a problem. So there's way too much in and out play, which then translates into backlash on the shaft. So I'm going to need to pull this all out and tighten the nut that holds the worm on. there should be no play here at all. I'm still feeling some end play, so I'll need to keep tightening this, tightening it and checking until I'm satisfied. Let's hope this is the last time I need to put this back together. So right now I'm just checking to see if I've gotten out as much backlash as I can. I think I have. I think I'm down to maybe 10 arc minutes at most. I don't think I'd ever be able to get it all out. I'd be interested in hearing from you that have rotary tables. Should I be able to get this down to near zero? Leave a comment. Let me know how much backlash is in your rotary table. Well, it was a lot of fun refurbishing this rotary table and making this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And hopefully we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.